I'm genuinely fascinated in this conversation because I'm delighted we've got Paul Tierney from MMC Ireland in a conversation with Edward Jezza from Homes England. And this is what we've just been talking about next door, this opportunity to learn together. So there's things that Ireland as a government and through the work that Paul is doing, we need to make sure we're tackling into. There's things that Homes England have done, some successfully, some as we've referred to not successfully, that we can collaborate on. So this is, imagine, a fireside chat between two people. We're not in the room. And they're going to kind of break the ground on all that's exciting and all that's difficult about MMC. And then we're going to be invited in to sort of ask questions at the end. So
You must be here for a while, Jess.
yeah, short form conversation. So I'd like to have them both with us. I'm going to hand over to Edward to chair, and then we'll have an opportunity to give questions and answers at the end. Edward.
Pleasure. Thanks, Jez. So yes, I'm Edward Jezza. I work closely on MMC at Homes England, the housing agency for England, not London, as we've heard. That's the GLA. I've been involved in the MMC agenda for the 8 years that I've been at Homes England. I was one of the co-authors of the much maligned MMC strategy, the Lord Meyer with 5 S's, which is deeply unpopular and does exist. But this is going to be a really interesting conversation because Ireland is has some really ambitious housing plans. They developed their own strategy, so I'm very happy to do the comparison and see where we align and where we part ways. And yeah, from that I'm really happy to kick off with Paul, and I think probably starting with the Housing for All is the kick-off moment.
Yeah, so firstly, just give you a bit about my background. So I'm far from a housing expert, and just who MMC Ireland are. MMC Ireland are for those who don't know, the representative body of the industry in Ireland, made up of 80-odd manufacturers, contractors, consultants, etc., all primarily focused on MMC. I myself have 30 years experience in MMC, 20 of those years living in the UK. So I've seen a lot of what's going on in the UK in MMC over the years. I've seen a lot of people come and go over the last 20 odd years too. And for the last year and a half, I've taken up a role as the CEO of MMC Ireland. And having never worked in residential, bar doing a couple of schemes in my previous life, to now being thrown into focused primarily on residential and working with a government in Ireland that, even though I'm from Ireland, my experience would have been working with the UK government, it was a bit of a seismic shift for me. And back to Lord Moylan's point this morning around the plan, what I found from my initial kind of workings with the Irish government and in particular the Department of Housing is, firstly, they have a plan. And I have to say, just speaking at a high level from the people who I've dealt with, who are senior civil servants and people who work with them and for them, I've found them to be very innovative, very agile, very open, asking the right questions, and where they have a knowledge gap, fill those gaps by going to the right places to fill those gaps. So MMC Ireland is only a couple of years old and it's going to fill that gap, and we would view ourselves as kind of the knowledge bridge between industry and government primarily. And I think it was worked very well. I think we have assisted government where we can, and it's been a two-way street. So with regards to Housing for All, so Housing for All was, and lastly, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the Irish government. I'm here to speak about my experience of MMC and how the Irish government have and are implementing their plans. So Housing for All was a plan put in place, I think it was September 2021, by the previous government. That government, the same two key parties, have just been re-elected. So that government is in place now about 4 weeks. So
you've got continuity across the plan?
Yeah, so it's the same government, same two key parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael for those who don't know. And to me, there was a very successful housing minister who stayed in post for the full term of his 5 years in the previous government, which I think was a really important key point in making Housing for All a success. Don't get me wrong, there's challenges in housing and there's bumps and there's peaks and troughs, but by and large, inheriting what that government inherited, and the gentleman, Darragh O'Brien is his name, he wanted to be the Minister for Housing for that tenure. He was intent on making a success of housing, and that is borne through from the people who work within that department. So Housing for All was launched in September 2021, and back to my point about being innovative, one of the key things around the number of action points that come out of Housing for All, and then there are a subset number of priority action points. They are reported on publicly quarterly. So on the government's website, which is gov.ie, you can go on. First of all, anybody can get the Housing for All document. Anybody can then go on to that government website and see how the government is doing against their confirmed actions.
Absolutely.
And quarterly updates, and it's an interesting read for those who are actually interested in housing delivery. But so Housing for All is the plan. From that plan comes subsets, but overall the strategy is Housing for All. I think to summarise the strategy is to have for everybody in the country, every citizen in the country, to have an affordable home, whether that's owned or rented.
So Ireland has what, around 5 million population, and what kind of numbers do they have in the plans and obviously emerging?
So the plan for the previous government was to get up to about 30,000 homes per annum, and for the last 3 years that average has been hit. The country didn't hit its expectations last year. I mean the target was 34, and the department thought they would do more than 34, and the actual number ended up being just over 30. So that was it was the first time the target wasn't hit. And there's a number of reasons for that, but my own opinion will be the target this year will make up for that lag in closures late last year. But the target for the next 5 years is to build 300,000 homes, which is basically doubling the output of what they have been doing. And I mean that's where MMC will play a key part.
And that's enormous in scale. So if we do the comparison against the UK, you were giving a kind of a rough estimate before.
Yeah, so you and I have had this conversation before where I kind of threw this number at you. So, I mean, just for my own ready reckoner, having worked primarily in the UK, I always compare the UK with Ireland. And quite simplistically, from a population point of view, the UK is 10 times the size of Ireland. It's actually slightly more, but I just use 10 as a very ready reckoner. And we were discussing the housing targets with England and the housing targets with Ireland. I'm saying, well, Ireland is planning to do 300,000 homes over the next 5 years. And if I was to use my little simple ready reckoner of 10 times that, the UK should be 3 million. And I'm playing it back saying, well, if the UK is right with 1.5, should Ireland be 150? Well, Ireland will say it absolutely needs to be 300,000. So I'm curious what the number in the UK should be. And we were discussing where these numbers come from.
Absolutely, and this morning we had a different message as well. So there's much debate around those numbers.
Yeah, so it's just an interesting kind of. It's a kind of pick it from a book. Like it's not a scientific number, but somewhere between 10 times and like somewhere between 5 and 12 times is the real number. And comparing 150 with 1.5 million, or sorry, 300 with 1.5 million, there's something gone awry there somewhere.
Absolutely. So talk about how the MMC roadmap came into that wider housing strategy.
So as part of Housing for All, the government identified that MMC had a massive part to play in housing delivery. So they have issued the government's roadmap for MMC delivery in Ireland. That was published, I think, about 2 years ago.
2023,
As part of that roadmap, it outlined a number of key initiatives for creating a sustainable MMC industry in Ireland, focused primarily on housing and then obviously spreading across different sectors within the country. There are, again, this roadmap readily available on the government website. Updates again are readily available on a quarterly basis.
I was really impressed. If you look at that document, it breaks down all the objectives and assigns timelines and the government departments. I've written them down: Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, so the employment side, and then also the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage have got roles and responsibilities across that spectrum.
And including the Department of Environment and a government agency called SULIS, which is responsible for skills, and the Department of Further and Higher Education. So they all feed into this document. And then as a subset of that document, you have the creation of an MMC leadership and integration group. And what that group does is works, like taking the roadmap and works there, executives from government and industry, working together collaboratively to see what the current status of MMC is, what needs to be done to make it better, and what the future looks like. So putting in place plans, initiatives tasking departments and tasking people with delivering those actions, and then reporting on the outputs of them. And I sat on the last MMC Leadership and Integration Group. We were invited on, and
So that's government and industry.
government and industry coming together,
Okay.
working together, listening to what industry has to say, the good, the bad,
Yeah.
and just working together to make. Like, I keep playing this back to the Irish government. They're tired of me saying it, but in fairness, it's actually happening. Their goal is to create. Their stated goal is to create a sustainable MMC industry in Ireland, and I keep playing it back to them. And in fairness, looking at the actions and looking at the outputs, it's exactly what they are trying to do and are doing.
Fantastic. So let's talk about some of the initiatives and objectives in that roadmap, because there's a whole range of targets and
Yeah.
programs and projects, dashboards.
Mhm.
What's in there?
So I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
I'll give you a snapshot of a couple of them. So one is the creation of a MMC demonstration park and national training facility. That's in an area called Mount Lucas, which is in the Midlands, smack bang in the middle of the country. I'm actually going there tomorrow morning. I was meant to be here, Jeb. I've been asked to go there tomorrow morning because the official opening of the MMC National Training Facility is taking place tomorrow. So I have to go and speak and say a few words of that. So, and what that demonstration park is basically they will be building a massive factory. There are a number of and student accommodation block using MMC. They are building a number of different housing typologies down there, using timber frame, light gauge steel, closed panels, precast concrete, 3D volumetric, a number of different types of housing, all using MMC, creating a little small cul-de-sac for people to live in, and then they'll monitor the performance of those homes over the next number of years. So they've been tendered, they've been won, planning's been granted, and they're just going through the final technical details before they go to the site, which will be this year. Then the factory will be built. The factory will be used for training, whether it's apprenticeships, whether it's graduates using BIM, whatever it is, to be a centre of excellence for training in MMC, all aspects of MMC. So that factory planning has been granted. That's going to construction this year. And in the meantime, I think I was showing you a video recently.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
So in the meantime, they have kind of virtual reality robots and kind of cabs of whatever kind of machinery it is. So you're looking at a screen, you're actually in, whether it's the JCB for argument's sake, just to bring it back to normal construction, you're sitting in your cab, you're looking at the screen of the actual site that you're working on outside. You can picture yourself actually on the site, but you're not allowed to get on site until you pass your training using the virtual reality. Then you go outside into a proper cab and
you actually get on with it.
You get on with it. So the training is done in a safe manner, controlled manner. You're not having young people on site in a dangerous environment. You have them work training in a controlled environment and then let out into a more live environment like a construction site. So that demonstration park, so it's been launched tomorrow. I'm keen to see what it's going to look like. But I've seen the plans, I've seen the initiative, the funding's in place. It'll be a centre of excellence for MMC training in the country.
Fantastic.
So that's one of the initiatives. Two, as part of the roadmap, was this accelerated delivery programme. So I call it a pilot, but it's a kind of pretty big pilot. So it's 1,500 MMC homes, and to kickstart this, so the government there's two initiatives going on with standardising housing types, which I know was discussed earlier on this morning, but they have a number of current standard housing types, and I'll come on to what's happening next with that shortly. And they went to the local authorities to kind of kickstart MMC delivery in housing and said, right, we will pay off all your land legacy debt on sites that you currently have. And they set aside 100 million to do that. And said, if you build your next batch of housing using these MMC typologies, you must use MMC and you must design to these standards, and here are the layouts to use.
So it's layouts and performance.
Layouts and performance.
Yeah. But not MMC typology. It wasn't picking categories.
No, so the government would be
materials.
technology agnostic, as would I. And I think that's the right way to go.
Yeah. So
they said we will write off legacy debt. They had set aside 100 million. 96 of that 100 has been drawn down. There are currently 26 sites, and 1,000 of those 1,500 are currently in contract, and those homes will be delivered this year and next year. So it was just an initiative to kickstart MMC delivery, encouraging local authorities who wouldn't otherwise have gone down that route.
Yeah.
Gives them exposure to it, gives them experience in wondering what MMC typologies are, and then that gives you a springboard to roll out that delivery.
It's a meaningful scale. So do you know yet what comes next, or what you feel comes next? Is it larger? So a reiteration of those types?
They haven't stated, they haven't given numbers in the new programme for government yet. I just know that it is a core policy, and no prescription of it. We're going to do 10,000 MMC homes. That hasn't been prescribed. It'll be whatever the market can.
Are you doing any research onto the completed houses or anything to kind of understand some of those lessons learned? And
So back to you mentioned the data dashboard there. So the government commissions KPMG to create, and what KPMG have said is the first of its type in the world. It's an MMC data dashboard. So that work kicked off late last year. I'm part of the working group in putting that together. And what that will do is make publicly aware, publicly available stats across all elements of MMC delivery in Ireland. And that will be around MMC housing delivery, typologies. It can be around PMV. It'll be around, I'm not sure whether they're going to do cost per square metre, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but every possible kind of metric you can think of for MMC, it's all been thrown onto the page at the start, and we're currently working through that with the Department of Housing, the Department of Enterprise, and KPMG to put that together into a meaningful data dashboard that people can take meaningful information from, and data is the key at the end of the day. And once you have the data, you can make decisions based on data.
amazing. So actually, let's pick up on that cost element, because it's something that Lord Moyen really honed in on this morning, saying, you know, you've got to know the value of the price of your product, and you're pricing to the market, you're pricing as a margin. So what's your perspective on the value that you see in the cost that's charged?
Well, cost, I heard Lord Moylan speak this morning, and he used the word cheaper a few times, which I would argue with. I didn't argue with him, but I think he had enough on his plate, which managed to kind of diffuse. But I would be. That's a terminology that gets my back up when people talk about cheaper. To me, its whole life costs is what should be viewed, and whether you take a 10-20 year view of what a home should cost, that's for me is the real value.
Are consumers
and the real
ready
cost.
for that?
Well, so I'm not sure if I've said this to you before. So one of the largest home builders in Ireland is a company called Glenveagh. So Glenveagh are factory-built homes. They deliver just under 3,000 homes last year. None of their home owners would think for a second their home was built in a factory. They're all A-rated homes. Every home that gets built in Ireland has to be A-rated. It's just standard. It can't be less than A. Common sense. A lot of the stuff is common sense. So Glenveagh would build last year built just under 3,000 factory-built homes, and they have 3 factories and currently opening a fourth factory. They primarily build with closed panel timber frame, but they've just opened the light gauge steel factory now, and starting to deliver light gauge steel. So they, as one of the largest home builders, they would do customer surveys or homeowner surveys every year, and it's a pretty comprehensive survey. And up until 2 years ago, every year from its inception, the number one reason that why people would buy a home, and the number one factor that they consider when buying a home, is the cost. That was
Can you afford it? Yeah.
That was always number one. What's the number one reason? Cost. For the last 2 years, the number one factor when deciding what home to buy is the energy performance and the cost of running that home.
Yeah, a longer term perspective.
So that's a real life example of the general population. It's a 3,000. It's a decent survey. So of those 3,000 homeowners, the number one factor for the last 2 years, that's 6,000 really, has been the ongoing cost of running that home and the energy performance. So that to me says yes, a lot of people are ready for that conversation. And I think if you're saving a couple of £1,000s a year on your energy bills, and you have a very comfortable, thermally efficient home to live in, yes, you will pay extra over and above as a capital cost.
Yeah. So if all homes are A-rated at the moment, where do you go next, or you just part that money?
Well, they're on the way to government are on the way to NZ.
Net zero.
Net zero. and then carbon neutral. So that is in the plan. I think 2025. There's some September 25. There's a key benchmark to hit, but I think from 26 on, I think they'll be like carbon neutral.
Excellent. So let's.
I could be wrong on that, but I know it's within the next couple of years.
Excellent. One of the things that obviously a big theme for today is temporary accommodation. That those challenges come from many places. One of them is obviously being the refugee crisis and Ukrainians. I'm aware there was the Homes for Ukrainian program. I'm interested in learning a little bit more about that.
I was at Katie's from Makroloff's fishbowl earlier on today, which was
In the bowl.
I came for the curiosity to see how good the ball was. But so I ended up speaking briefly about that program.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I'll talk about it now briefly again. But I think the principle of that program can be taken and used across so many other aspects. I think jumping into homeless would be the first area it can be used, and then further on. So you had a need, like no more than the UK. There was a war in Ukraine, and there was a number of refugees heading to Ireland and UK and elsewhere across Europe. Ireland took in just under 100,000 refugees in a very, very short space of time. Obviously, it's a massive challenge, and like no more than here, hotels, like everything was used to house these unfortunate people. And one of the initiatives the government did is, okay, we're going to take 2,000 people, and we're going to get them into homes ASAP, new homes ASAP. We have to use MMC, and how are we going to do it? So they called it an emergency, and my understanding is by calling it an emergency, you can cut through a lot of the red tape. And I don't know why the word emergency can be used for homelessness, and cut through a lot of the red tape, but I'll come back to that in a second. So they declared it an emergency, and they went to the market, they appointed a managing contractor who would be basically developing the sites. They went out to the MMC sector and sat down and said, we need to agree on a standard typology that each one of you can build. So four manufacturers came to the table, shared open data with each other, and agreed on a design that each of them can build interchangeably.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of these sites, which is in Cork, has 3 different manufacturers' homes on the site, but they're all identical. And some manufacturers had issues, other manufacturers stepped in. It was completely swap in and swap out. So as a framework, I think it's an ideal type of framework. The government looked at land, which is always an issue, and planning. They took sites. I think I said earlier on, there needs to be a genuine will and want to do this, and it needs to come from the top down.
Yeah.
And there was a genuine will and want to do this. So money wasn't going to get in the way of doing it without being wasteful, but it wasn't going to get in the way of doing this.
And local communities at that local level
Bought in.
Yeah.
So they bought in. So they took land across the country, owned by local authorities, owned by government, that wasn't going to be developed for housing because it made no financial sense.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there is hundreds if not thousands of those across the country, both here and in Ireland. And the government said, we'll pay for remediating that. We'll do whatever needs to be done. Some sites are on 30-degree angles, some are contaminated. Whatever it was,
Fix it.
we'll fix that.
Yeah.
Then we have standard, like these designs are fantastic, standard designs which any one of a number of manufacturers can manufacture. They have a pipeline ahead of them for the next 12, 15 months, so everyone bought into it, with the opportunity for more which is coming in the next wave. And they said, okay, this absolutely makes sense. And they all came together, and this program was just rolled out, and it became a huge success. With regard to planning, whilst planning wasn't required, every element of the schemes, from placemaking, from compliance to the buildings themselves, all criteria were met.
Right.
It just didn't have to go through the process.
And they were permanent buildings?
Permanent buildings.
Yeah, there wasn't been one.
Permanent buildings. Now they can be relocated because they're 3D volumetric.
Yeah.
So they are fully relocatable.
They've got the flexibility.
Flexibility. Yeah.
Excellent. And how did the procurement work? Because I mean, clearly, when you set up these big programs with huge ambition, you know, the rubber hits the road when you create a framework that delivers the outcomes and enables the supply chain and your members to actually deliver it.
So there's a number of ways that how this could be done. This was one way, and I have feelings whether this is the right way or not, but this is exactly how this was done. So a managing contractor was appointed, happened to be CISC, who are the largest in the country. So a trusted contractor who has delivered many government schemes over the years. So they were appointed by government. They then went to the market and met and tendered a collaborative tender with the market on designs designed by the OPW.
Yeah.
So these designs were designed by the OPW, which is the Office of Public Works, and they shortlisted 4 contractors, 4 manufacturers, sat down with them, fine-tuned both the design and the price, so that each of the contractors are within nothing of each other, basically.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter who was building what. There was no this costs an extra 5,000. I'm not going to use.
It wasn't an enormous difference.
It was next to nothing, and because the pipeline was there, each other manufacturer had a vested interest to ensure that each one of them succeeded.
Yeah.
So they all worked very well together to make sure the program was a success.
Yeah, excellent. So, and that you feel that this is going to be replicated going forward?
I mean, I just think. To me, when you have such a successful program and an example of a real life example that worked, why can't you just pick it up and use it for somewhere else?
Yeah.
And whether that's homeless, call it an emergency.
Yeah.
There are more of these sites that are out there that aren't going to be developed on.
You needed that political will, though, and
You need the political will.
desire to cut
Yeah,
through the red tape.
You do, and I'm not saying that the Irish government are doing that next, because there's no plan to do it for in Dublin, but I know Limerick, which is down in the south of Ireland, they're doing 1,000 of these now. So there's an initiative called Limerick 2030, pretty much identical designs to the ones that were used for Ukrainian families. They're going through their shortlist at the moment. They will pick their panel, and they will deliver 1,000 of these. And whether they call them meanwhile sites or semi-permanent, it'll be exactly the same program. And the tenants who will go into them, I don't know whether they're homeless people. I'm not sure who will be using them, but it's 1,000 more homes that will be built rapidly starting this year.
Fantastic. Let's talk about the new government. You mentioned that briefly. You've been engaging with them and you've been kind of encouraging them to look at the off-site space to continue that journey. There's also an innovation fund coming forward. So can you give a bit of steer about what you've been asking for and what you're hoping to see?
Yeah, so I mean, as part of MMC Ireland, I've no vested interest in the industry other than to help. I mean, to help government, to help the MMC Ireland members. Other than that, I have no vested interest. I'm just keen to help and keen to share my knowledge, keen to share my views, and also to share the knowledge and views of the members with government, and vice versa. So back to my point about being a knowledge bridge, that's what I see myself as. Whether my knowledge is good or not, I don't know, but I see myself as that. And when it comes to the new government, again, it's only 4 weeks old. We, as MMC Ireland, advocated for a number of initiatives to be in the draft programme for government, no more than we advocated back in the pre-budget submission late last October. So they have announced a number of things, one being an MMC Innovation Fund, which I'm keen to see what that looks like. I believe it's over 200 million. What it's going to be, the detail of that, it hasn't been stated, but I'm keen to have those conversations around giving them what the members would see and what the industry would see as useful, meaningful ways of using that money, particularly as it's around innovation. I don't know whether it's supporting new factories, I have no idea. But it's been announced, it's in the draft programme for government, and I look forward to dealing with them and helping them spend that money in the right place.
Absolutely.
So that's one area. Another line that was in there which I found very interesting. I mean, I've been an advocate of having never worked in residential. I just come in with a pretty, why can't you do this? It's just, I know you.
Indeed, why not?
Yeah, you can come up with a lot of reasons, but I just keep asking, why can't you do this? And planning is obviously a massive issue. And one of the things I've been saying for the last 12 months is, if you can come up with a number of standard typologies, and standard could be 10 standard typologies, and you need buy-in from all stakeholders here. You need buy-in from government, which I believe there is, the local authorities, the planning authorities more importantly, and other agencies, but they're the three key stakeholders. The work in progress is taking place at the moment on the new standard typologies. Hawkins Brown are leading on that. I'll come back to that in a second. So if you could agree these standard typologies with an external palette of finishes that the planners can say, we want X, Y, and Z, and you have these sites around the country, and once you hit the standard criteria, whether that's X number of homes per acre. I don't know what they are,
Yeah.
and
Whatever they need to be.
whatever they need to be.
Yeah.
And you're hitting all the environmental targets, etc., etc., etc. Let the architects focus on placemaking. Let the architects focus on making that area a nice place to live. All the technical work on the homes has been done.
Yeah.
And that to me should be a single fast track planning process. And unless there's something fundamentally wrong with the scheme, there can be no objections. And I mean, that might be a controversial view, but that's my view. And the reason it's my view is if you want to take this seriously and deliver the amount of homes that have to be built, whether it's here or in Ireland, I'm speaking about Ireland, like that to me is a massive positive impact to chipping away at that number. And whether the number is 300,000 in Ireland or 1.5 million in the UK, that's a massive step forward. And some people might say, well, we have the right to object. Well, I mean, people have the right to object, but you need to create these zones and show the people who are living in these communities, these zones here are subject to these rules.
Yeah.
And over the next number of years, 5-10 years, the likelihood is there will be housing estates built, and because they're standard typologies, people might get hung up on what's it going to look like. It'll look like any other home in the country. I mean, like Glenveigh, as I say, go back to Glenveigh and Cairn, the two of the biggest, they have standard typologies.
Yeah.
They have 6 or 7 standard house types. And a housing scheme in Dublin looks exactly the same as a housing scheme in Kilkenny, just nobody knows.
Yeah.
And so it's language, and people are afraid of hearing certain terms. And there's nothing wrong with standardisation, nothing at all. And I'm not sure who said it earlier on. Most houses are standard anyway.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms and a kitchen and a dining room. I mean, so
It does feel like we're building some consensus around that, whereas when I was joining this agenda 7-8 years ago, the word standardisation was pure fear and talked in hushed tones. You know, we heard from Tom Copley a moment ago, standardisation and pipeline building is going to be key. So I think it's interesting that debate has evolved, but there's still a nervousness from industry, from the market, from consumers perhaps. Yeah,
well, I mean, there is, when people hear the word standardisation, because they just think they're going to look at a box. Just going to look at a box, and it's just educating the marketplace into it's not that. And I know people talk about cars being standard and an Audi being the same as a Volkswagen, just different chassis or different external finishes. That is a fact. So it's just educating the population around what these terms actually mean and look like.
Excellent. We can keep going, but I would like to throw it out to the audience if anybody's got any immediate questions. Otherwise, I will. Gaynor. Please.
Oh, for you, Ed.
Oh, for me? Oh,
thank you, Gaynor.
I am the chair.
I can actually take a breath.
I know, but you know how hard we've worked
Indeed.
together over the last 7 years. And we talked a lot about roadmaps and playbooks and things. But is that, like Paul said, not something that you, as Homes England, could just adopt rather than have it redone?
Massively, in terms of do we need to reinvent the wheel every time for ourselves? I don't think so. I mean, there's a huge amount of lessons that we can learn from what Ireland's been doing. Obviously, the Welsh Government's doing some pretty exciting things at the moment. We want to be leveraging that knowledge and capability and skills as well, and drawing upon that rather than doing it from a fresh start. It's not always easy in government, though.
But if you could do anything to make it easier in government, surely taking work that's best in class elsewhere and piecing all that together. And you talked about the MMC team that come together, which is cross government and industry. How I don't think that would be too hard to set up here if there was enough will.
Absolutely.
From enough.
I agree. I mean, there are some industry forums. The Construction Leadership Council is one where you bring the government and industry together. I think what Ireland has done really effectively and was fantastic in their strategy for Housing for All and the roadmap is the way that they've got government departments aligned and then distributed the different work streams across them. That is something that is, hard to achieve sometimes, to get different government entities to come together when they've got their own challenges as individual departments. But where they're shared, I think there's an opportunity. And you're leveraging their capability. Yeah,
I think you've seen that, Ed. I mean, you've seen the Rob Buck yourself firsthand.
Yeah.
And I know there's ongoing dialogue between yourselves and yours.
Indeed, absolutely.
Housing. So there is open dialogue between, and the Department of Housing quite openly said, we've learned so much from Ed and Homes England and what they've done, and hopefully I think it's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
I do think the advantage that the Irish government has, and it's a significant advantage, is that it's a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to be agile. And like, I don't envy Ed's job in any way, shape or form, but what I have found is there's definitely an open door policy from my dealings with the Department of Housing in particular and the Department of Enterprise. There's an open door policy. They're happy to sit down and have conversations. Because I haven't got a vested interest, I'm not a company coming in looking to sell something, and we're just having, as I call them, grown-up conversations around how to make things work. And there are a smaller number of key people within the Irish Department of Housing, and it would particularly be in Homes England.
A slightly different scale, but there's also the thing to mention is the role of the Irish supply chain delivering to the UK, which is quite substantial and quite meaningful. Anyway, next question, lady in the grey jacket.
I was just wondering, if you don't have this answer, it's fine, but you said obviously the goal is to make sure everybody has access to an affordable home. Is there a definition of what that is? Is it like part of the market? Is it livable income?
Yeah, so again, I'm not from the Irish government, but I know the actual technical term for affordable in Ireland, I think, is 75% of market value. I think that's the technical term. So if that's to be applied to the stated goal of the Housing for All, that's what it is.
And sorry, I'm going to sneak another one in, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I guess similar to the question I was asked before about what Homes England can do, is there anything, I mean, not necessarily that you can implement right away, the snap of your fingers, but is there anything part of what Ireland is doing at the moment that you think needs to be adopted here?
So I think we can certainly learn lessons from the procurement structures and how they work with the supply chain and how they've got also from the national to local government harmonised around and the design variations, and so I think there's some technical points, there's some political points, there's a number of different aspects which again Tom Copley talked about place the pan London accommodation approach, which was to do with temporary accommodation, and that came in with political support, came in with ambition, and it didn't hit the ground, and it really struggled to get going, and then they wound it down. So we know it's hard, which is why we've got to really listen to those who have succeeded and see where we can learn the lessons.
I think on this, one thing around the standardisation, which we touched on briefly, so there's a current amount of work being done by the Department of Housing. They've appointed Hawkins Brown, I'm not sure if Nigel is in here at the moment. So Hawkins Brown, an excellent NMC design practice, and they are working with the Department of Housing in looking to standardise a number of housing typologies and apartments. Now, what they've done, again, which to me shows some innovation around how you standardise, they set up a number of stakeholder engagements. And the first stakeholder engagement has representatives from the planners, developers, architects, building services, sustainability, and NMC. So you have these stakeholders in the room working with the departments and working with their lead designers in coming up with what these standardised housing types are going to look like. So to me, it's very easy to draw 4 rectangles and put them together, and there you go, there's a 3-bedroom house. But taking all the right stakeholders and coming up with, here's what a portion of our housing stock will look like going forward.
It's that co-design element.
It's absolutely
bringing them on the journey with you.
And that's so important.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's the way they think just speaks volumes for me in their thought process.
Fantastic. Green top, maybe.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely fascinating conversation, Paul, really interesting and lots of takeaways. With the main contractor playing that role and then procurement, are they getting access to delivering the remediation enabling works as part of that? Is that part of what they're doing in that piece? Great. And then the second observation I made, you really stressed this, was around this was an emergency and therefore there is this space to do things differently. I have to articulate that I'm very frustrated in England that actually Homes England haven't really acknowledged that this is an emergency, and Homes England are very good at delivering typical development, urban growth, that type of thing with private sector. But we need exactly what you've highlighted. We need a specialist team that's business leaning into government, with the minds that we've had at this forum today to really drive this forward. Because actually lots of people have been saying, well, the solutions you've articulated for the last 5 years, but not getting traction. So we really do need to find a way of Homes England leaning into the audience that you've had today and really thinking about how we create a triage team to really accelerate the pace and scale that we have here. Because we've got 317 local authorities here, so we have to drive this through in a different way.
Absolutely.
You've got the land.
We've got the land, we've got the money, we've got the industry.
If only we had the.
But I think it's a really important point is the frustration of it. When you look at what you've done in Ireland, and the same thing we did at the Olympic Park in East London, you basically ignore local planning, create a planning zone, and just go and do it, and you override everything. How long can you sustain denying local democracy in house building?
Is that aimed at me?
I think it's a philosophical question. If you're able to answer it, brilliant. But, we look at local communities across the UK, 317 local authorities, massive numbers to be built. And the biggest challenge that I have, I'm the chair of Core House Limited, so we do MMC here at the factory when we get the chance. The biggest challenge we face is the local planner has, or the taste question, let's call it, for want of anything better. Then somebody else objects to it because it's for homeless people. Somebody else, so we have this sort of miasma of sort of planning objections to plough our way through, setting aside the 2-year damn development process to get through it in the first place before you get told no. That'd be a lot easier. So you come on and say, that piece of land there, get on with it. But you break all sorts of procurement regs in the first place, but the issue is denial of local democracy would be a real problem in a number of parts of certainly England.
I'll give you my view on that. Firstly, I'm not an advocate of getting rid of the power of planning and planning objections at all. I think it's an important right for a citizen to have. Once the rules are set around what you can object to, and my point earlier around my view of delivering homes at pace and at scale is dedicating, and it's just a thing called strategic development zones back in Ireland. I'm sure it's probably the same here, Ed, where 100 acres of land, for argument's sake, is dedicated.
Zone, yeah.
Exactly. And you just get on and build once the outline plans are done. So,
Yeah.
but for the delivery of rapid build MMC homes to deal with the crisis or to deal with the emergency, whatever you want to call it, or a challenge, the housing challenge, like in certain circumstances, and I'm saying start off with a relatively small number of circumstances and see how it works.
Yeah.
So back to you have your standard typologies, you meet all the key criteria, environmental, placemaking, etc., etc., etc. You hit all those tasks, there should be no objection to planning. And start off that on a small scale and see how it works. And maybe it stays at a small scale, I don't know, but certainly try it. It worked for the Ukrainian family program, so there's a success story. So take that, build on that, and suck it and see for want of a better word.
So
But
you're
certainly,
saying, let's create a fear of missing out. So it will be good. If you're doing it well over there, I'd like it in my backyard, please. Absolutely.
well, I mean, if you're delivering these homes are like A-rated quality homes, and they aren't like something that you don't want to live in.
exactly.
And you're creating homes for whether it's your children, whether it's your auntie, whether it's your mother. Like, why wouldn't you want them in your area?
Exactly.
I think that one thing I wanted to draw upon was your comment about the Olympic Park, and what you had there was a national event, political alignment, and a deadline.
Yeah.
And that was the conditions which brought that forward. But it was also quite a bumpy road. My bosses were involved in some aspects of that, and it was not easy to get it through. And to your point, you've got to engage with the local democracy, and there's a tension there.
But the only thing missing now is the deadline. Everyone agrees there's a crisis and we need it.
So I think the temporary accommodation cost is our
The deadline's the
deadline.
next general election.
Yeah,
So effectively,
it's true, it is. Yeah, it is.
Well, in the deadline, the next when we're going to build a 1.5 million homes, for example.
Edward, I think you've led a great conversation and you've made Paul show how it's a bit like the rugby. The Irish showed real strength and by association put huge pressure on the English. And it also appears that the MMC lands best with the public sector or the state provision in a sense. So it's sort of throwing it back. What proportion of the houses in Ireland are MMC, and how are those largely in the state sector, let's say?
Yeah.
And how do we compare? How does Homes England? Where are you?
It's a great question.
At the metrics, and where do you want to be?
Well, I can answer so LMC, including the 2D panellised, is by far and away the largest contributor to home building in Ireland and probably here in the UK. So on average, closed panel 2D, whether it be light gauge steel or timber frame, accounts for, on average over the last 3 years, just over 50% of home delivery.
The whole market.
The whole market,
Wow.
private and public. So it's just over 50%. The intent, I would imagine, over the next number of years is for that to go up, particularly when we're heading towards doubling the output for the last 3 years. So it's currently rests at over 50%.
Well, ironically, Scotland, who we're beating rugby, we hope, they're about 90% timber frame, aren't they? It's weird, isn't it?
But frequently open panel.
But okay, less than closed panel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas in England, it's perhaps 20-30%, something in that territory, open panel. And at the moment, a lot of volume house builders are opening their own manufacturing facilities of open panel. So I guess one of the opportunities is to encourage them to continue that enhancement journey, do more work in the factory, because effectively we want to see higher quality homes. And if they've got a production facility, that's a great starting point.
And move to closed panels, you're saying? Because that's
Again, we
more
want-
value added.
Precisely,
Quality,
we believe that more work done in the factory delivers a better housing outcome, but where our focus is on the outcome, not on the process. That's for the market to decide.
Yeah. But what's the proportion of your houses, you say, or did you say that? That are MMC or?
I mean, the problem with MMC is that every home will be MMC under the 7 categories. So this is the challenge of language and what are you trying to do?
Cat 2, say.
Cat 1 and Cat 2. I mean, Homes England is mandated it in our affordable housing programme, so we're seeing 20-30%. We're driving that forward, but what we're really interested in is driving the more enhanced solutions, the volumetric modular Cat 1 and the closed panel Cat 2. But it's great to start with open panel Cat 2, so we're not dismissing that for a new partner who hasn't delivered MMC before, taking that as their first step.
Thank you.
I just see Liam with his hand up down there. I'm not sure about there. Liam, did you have your hand up?
No.
Who's
Okay.
hiding?
I'm
Steve, please.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a bit of a Celtic thing everyone here, Paul. I'm from Wales.
Okay.
And 2 weeks ago we launched a happy book developed by 23 of the housing social landlords in Wales.
Yeah.
Developed by Stride Tribunal. I'd love to connect Stride Tribunal with the Hawkins Brown guys you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Because there's a very similar kind of path being trod there.
Yeah.
But I just think the key takeaways from the work we've been doing is all about listening and engagement.
Yeah.
So the team we've had on board have been working with the landlords and getting 23 landlords. We've got 40 developing landlords. We've got half of them in our kind of tent. Getting them to all agree is not easy, right? It really isn't. And there's a maturity that's required to how you get those kind of conversations going. Unless they can agree, I don't think we go anywhere. But we've kind of got somewhere with what we've done here. And the second part is working the supply chain. So we've tracked about 20 MMC, mainly working in the category 2 spaces. 10 have been involved in co-designing the designs we've got. So we're about to go into a kind of prototyping phase, which actually, when you talked about doing things small and learning from it, that's where we are.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk after as we can.
The collaboration is the most important thing, and industry working with governments, coming up with the solutions, to me, it's the only way it'll work.
And I think trust is the currency.
Yep.
It's the ultimate currency, isn't it? Without that, you can just forget going anywhere, you know? Yeah.
Excellent.
I'd love to talk after, thank you.
Okay.
I'm sure the question's been asked before, but Paul, you talked about 300,000 homes as a target for that. We've got our 1.5 million target. I wonder how confident the government feels in hitting that target and how confident the UK government feels in hitting their target, and what you think you can learn, the UK government can learn from the Irish one in terms of making sure it hits it.
Well, I can't say how confident they are, to be perfectly honest with you. I think they have, it's widely recognised and it's cross-party that 300,000 is the number that has to be hit. They have, over the last 3 years, been successful in hitting the average number of homes that they said they would build. So, but that's now going to be doubled. So it's an ambitious target, and it isn't going to go from an average of 30 to an average of 60. it's not going to go from 30 in 2024 to 60 in 2025. That isn't going to happen, which means at some point you need to build 80 odd thousand. So, because most likely if we can get 40,000 this year in Ireland and then go from 40, maybe 45, like the number at some point will be 85, 90. So that's the number I think people need to focus on, because to do 300, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to get to over 60. And for me, the challenge is building 90. So how confident the government is in building 90,000 homes in 4 or 5 years' time, you'd have to ask them. If you ask the industry, which I do because I represent quite a lot of them, they'll all say, like, if you ask them, somebody who owns a factory, can you double what you do? They're all going to say yes. So we'll temper what they say and say, okay, I'll take yes, but I'll cut it in half. And I'm currently doing a bit of work for Céline in the Department of Housing. They want to understand what the true capacity of the industry is. Now, the capacity in the industry, when you're dealing with a supply chain who is also working in other sectors, it becomes even more of a challenge. So quite simply, in Ireland, if you're looking at 3D volumetric players who don't work in the residential space, but to get to those numbers, they most likely would need to come to the table. But there's just been an education framework released, 2 lots purely for 3D volumetric players of $1 billion each. And if you compare $1 billion framework and we do a simple sum of multiplying it by 10, that's like a 10 billion 3D volumetric framework to build schools just being launched in the UK. 3D volumetric players are going to jump on that. Yeah. And there's 2 of them. So you've competing government departments within the same client, the same government, looking for the same supply chain. So that's why it's really important that innovative techniques are looked at, innovative procurement techniques are looked at. Otherwise, we won't hit the number. So those conversations are taking place now, because if they don't take place now and be implemented in sometime in 2025, the number will become a challenge. That's just my own personal view, not the Irish government's view.
Just to come back I obviously don't speak for the government. I'm in the government agency. The government has been quite clear, though, in terms of its public announcements. Matthew Pennycook, the Housing Minister, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, even last week was saying they're aiming for 1.5. They could have set a lower number. They could have set something that was less ambitious and easier to achieve, and that isn't what they wanted to do. So I think that's great to have that level of ambition coming from the government. We all understand, I think, the mountain that we have to climb, particularly from the starting point where we're at the moment in a housing downturn, to turn that round. But we're beginning to see the decisions coming out of government and announcements recently, even the digitisation of conveyancing and speeding up some of the delivery processes of, removing some of the treacle from the system, which will help us to get there.
Yeah, I think for me it's about converting aspiration, perhaps unrealistic aspiration, to pragmatism of what's actually going to be done. Because once you start quoting figures for too long, they just become figures.
So the next announcements will come along with the spending review, which is in June, and there'll be a 10-year housing strategy. My understanding is that will also articulate the role of Homes England as the delivery body in England to supporting the government in that as an objective. So we're working with government collaboratively to understand the role that we can play in the 1.5 million round.
We're going to have to cut it because I've got to keep on programme. What I'd say is it fair to say, are you both around for a bit during the tea break? Right, so look, I'm going to volunteer both Edward and Paul to take further questions and discussion in the tea break, so you're still on the hook. But can I just reflect? I think this is such a real live journey, and I just want to recognise the work of the Welsh Government, the LPs, and I think it's so exciting that piece of work's happening now. I really do. I think it's incredible. And yes, I think we acknowledge Ireland is a smaller country, but that sense of ambition and strategic leadership, and you as that agnostic enabler, is really interesting to me. And I think that we should be really encouraged, actually, that there is this learning that's happening. And I think it's really interesting as well what the Welsh Government is also looking at. And again, on that journey, that sort of arc of despair to hope, where we started this morning, leave it to the market will work out, why would you support a factory, into, no, there's a really credible pathway here to how you incubate and support different delivery mechanisms around really clear social value outcomes. And I think, just to recognise, I think it's really exciting what's happening, Paul, and I think we are rooting for you to succeed.
Not me, but
but also to make sure that level of collaboration continues as well with our Celtic friends in Wales. and then to work through Homes England, the other agencies. Let's be really clear, housing is not delivered by one person, one partner, one company. It is this collaboration. That's why it's so difficult, it's a complex system. But I think what we're seeing really credibly, Paul, there is that leadership position, and it's happening.
Yeah.
And I just want to pick up on the local democracy point, because I think it's really key. Some of this is about what we mean by democracy, frankly. And democracy happens across national, regional, local government. It also is about strong leadership and mandates to do things. And I think some of this is how we advocate for change. And that isn't always about leaving it to a very small subcommittee of a planning, but they don't even understand what their remit is. So let's be clear. Ultimately, democracy is about strong, powerful leadership that people buy into and understand, that builds trust. And I think that's part of what this is about. That's why housing is so key. So can we give these gentlemen a massive round of applause?